Welcome to the Inclusion Think Tank podcast, where we talk about inclusive education, why it works, and how to make it happen. A note from the host. As this and several future episodes were pre-recorded, you will hear references to New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education, also known as NJCIE, which has since undergone a name change to All In for Inclusive Education. Please note that, although it has a new name, All In for Inclusive Education is still doing its usual awesome things. On today's episode, I welcome my guest, Sara Jutcovich. Sara is an inclusion facilitator with All In. She is currently a doctoral student studying educational leadership with a specialization in special education. During our conversation today, we discuss specially designed instruction, often referred to as SDI, why it is important, and how educators can plan to incorporate SDI into their classroom settings. I would like to welcome everyone back to another episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast, brought to you by New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education. I am your host, Arthur Aston, and I am joined today by my guest, Sara Jutcovich. So thank you, Sara, for joining me today. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having me, Arthur.
Yes. So to begin our conversation, can you share a little bit about yourself, who you are, some things you enjoy doing in your free time? I always say if you have any free time. And also share a little bit about what you do as an inclusion facilitator with NJCIE.
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I was a teacher in New York City for 10 years. My background is inclusive education and elementary education. I also have a master's in literacy as well. And the reason I went into all of that is when I was a young student, I would say second or third grade, I was diagnosed with a learning disability as well, and just have really been passionate about inclusive education. I've had a range of educational experiences in segregated settings and inclusive settings, and they were night and day. So my focus has really been all around inclusive education. I went to undergrad for that, and I was really specific in the kind of program I was looking for. And ever since then, I've been passionate about that and really working to help, give more opportunities for students to have inclusive educational experiences. And like you said, in my spare time, if I have any, I do have two little kids, two daughters, ages 2 and 4. So we're very busy here when I'm not working, keeping up with them and just running around. But they're the best. And yeah, and I'm trying to think what else. Oh, my day-to-day as an inclusion facilitator. What's so great about this job is that there's no 2 days that are the same. I really get to do so many wonderful things being an inclusion facilitator. Some days I'm in schools working with our implementation teams for our grant work. Other days I'm doing coaching for some of our for-fee schools. It really is a range where we're presenting and speaking at conferences, working with colleagues, collaborating. Right now, a colleague of mine, we're doing some redesign on some of our packages around co-teaching and differentiation. So we're always doing different things, and it's what keeps this job so interesting, right? And special.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been I've been here for, it's my second, going into my third. So this has been a really great time at NJCIE.
I love asking that question of, first, I love asking the question of how you became interested in inclusive education, just to hear everyone's story, because it's, we all got here somehow with finding our passion and finding our love of what we do, and then also the inclusion facilitator, asking what you do, and everyone says the same thing, like it's so different every day, like it's just, it keeps it interesting, and that's the
Yeah.
that's the fun part of it all.
It keeps it interesting, and it also gives us such like a range of understanding of like education as a whole. Like we're seeing
Mhm.
different things happening in even some schools within the same district.
Right.
Different things, different mindset, different areas of need, different areas of strength. So it's really incredible to see such dedicated teachers really across the board, but also different things happening and how we can support.
Yes. Yeah. So, as you are well aware, this podcast is all about inclusive education. So, how would you define inclusive education? What does inclusive education mean to you?
Um, I have a few thoughts on it. So it's um I think it really means all children and all kids, right? Not some kids, all kids, and that's something we come across a lot in our work as well. Can learn and be successful in a general education environment. We know the research is really clear on that. We know the legislation is clear on that, but really that belief, that true deep belief that all students can be successful and should be placed there. So that they have the best outcomes for their future. I mean, that's really, I think, like the bottom line. I think it also, though, is really a commitment about how kind of we view society and our outlook on things, and how we believe truly that all students deserve to be have that sense of belonging, that sense of true, membership in their community. And I think, it's sometimes we hear one of those misconceptions like, oh, that sounds so nice on paper, but like that's not going to work in reality. But it can work in reality, and it does work in reality when it's set up properly, right? When we have those supports in place for our students, and also those supports in place for our teachers so that they feel supported as well in this process. So there's a lot of factors and a lot of kind of players at play. But it is possible, and we do see this, as successful when all of the supports are put in place. And again, when teachers, administrators, families have that understanding that this is really a right for all children, not just a select few and a handful of students, but really for all. And I think once we wrap our head around that piece, then the rest kind of falls into play, because then we can make it work. But it's really that mindset of that all students deserve this, and not just a handful.
Yes, yeah, that is I think that's the true definition of inclusion, like to include everyone, and realizing that that looks different for different students. It's, their inclusion level, it looks different. But it is possible. It can be done.
Right.
And just, having the full support of everyone involved and making it happen is, the key to being successful with it. So
Right.
thank you for that. That was a great, great explanation. In June, we held our summer inclusion conference, and you were one of the presenters. And your presentation was on specially designed instruction. So can you share with us what specially designed instruction, also known as SDI, can
Mhm.
you share with us what that is?
Absolutely. And it's actually one of my favorite topics to really talk about and discuss. Um, we've been seeing more and more schools and districts asking for support around this. So that's one of the reasons why I picked this for the presentation topic. Um, so specially designed instruction is what makes special education special. So one of the activities that I start with for really all of my presentations around this is I show IDEA section 300.39, in case if you want to look it up, and it really has the definition laid out. So it says specially designed instruction is a means of adapting as appropriate the content, methodology, and delivery of instruction. And I actually have the teachers and staff members go through and underline important parts of the definition. And when we kind of tease it out, right, we're adapting content, methodology, and delivery to address unique needs. And something important that it says in IDEA is that it doesn't say to give some access, right? But it actually says to ensure access. So it's really that promise of providing access for students. And then it goes on to say it's to meet the educational standards, right? It's not just to, again, give access to the standards or, have students just kind of hear it, right? Kind of that superficial level, but really to meet the educational standards, which is the goal. And that's really our job as special education teachers, to be providing specially designed instruction. And, sometimes in the day-to-day of either co-teaching or, whatever position you're in, having kids keep up with the content and all of those things, that piece can sometimes get lost, especially design instruction piece. So that's really what the presentation was about. It was how to plan, how to think through specially designed instruction, and also, where to start. Where do I start when I'm trying to plan specially designed instruction? I'm looking at a student's IEP or multiple students' IEPs and thinking, okay, what strategies do I need to put in place? What systems do I need to have to really make sure that I'm getting at the heart of specially designed instruction? Because it's, again, what the teacher is doing for the students. So sometimes we'll hear, oh, well, I gave them a graphic organizer. That's the specially designed instruction, right? Or I gave them extended time. but that's not really the instruction the teacher is providing. That's a tool or an accommodation that the student is using, which is also important, but that's not specially designed instruction. So specially designed instruction would be a really targeted reading comprehension strategy if that was an IEP goal that the student was working on, or if they have a reading disability, that targeted instruction, which we know would benefit other students. That's called incidental benefit, right, for the gen ed students. But it is something that is designed specifically for that student in mind based on their IEP and their educational needs.
Yeah, I love, they say words are important. And, when you said to ensure, like
Yeah,
that's like, that's a really big, like,
yeah,
really big emphasis. Like that means something. That really
yeah.
does mean something versus a more general use of a word. Um,
Absolutely. And the
yeah.
few times the several times I've done this with groups of teachers, they've picked out that word ensure and meet
Hmm.
educational standards. So they're kind of
Yeah.
focused on those verbs, right? And that power that is coming to this, that this is the goal. It is really our job to provide this, and it's what's going to help move our students.
Yeah. Yeah. When you said that, I was like, wow, like that's a really,
Yeah, it's bold that they
yeah,
said that. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, it's a really bold, yes, good, a
Yeah.
bold word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that really it really hit me like, okay, like so that really yeah, it really means something. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. And it's Anne Benninghoff, who I've used a lot of her research and her work in our SDI trainings, and something she says, which I love, and I always kind of end my presentations with this, is this should be an empowering thing for special education teachers. Like this idea that we are providing this specially designed instruction that another teacher is not able to do it like we are able to do this, that this should really be a level of empowerment for us. And sometimes we talk with special ed teachers and they feel like they're not sure what they should be doing in the classroom, or they feel kind of like an assistant or an aide, or they feel, it's not their place to stop in the what the general education teacher's doing, or add their insight. And again, I think once we can reframe it as like, this is our job, this is our core responsibility to be providing specially designed instruction to students with IEPs, it can really shift, how we're planning, how we're thinking about instruction, and make a lot of impact.
yeah, and again, another good word, empowering. Like that's
Right? We all need to be empowered.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's wow. So why is it important to implement SDI, and how can educators plan or incorporate SDI into their classroom setting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I spend a lot of time really talking about the implementation, right? Because we can like research the best strategies, and I always share, lists and lists of strategies and best practices for, different things to do, especially design instruction. There is no list, right? So it's kind of, we have to kind of put together these best practices through research. We want to keep it really evidence-based and research-based. But once we have that understanding, right? Like, okay, I know, multisensory learning or using a think aloud, that could be an example of specially designed instruction. But then how do I implement it, right? That's kind of that next step. And we always want to leave teachers with the action. We want it to be actionable for them, because if we just give content and we don't make it applicable, we're not gonna use it, right? Like anyone.
Hmm.
So this thought of how do we then take what we know about specially designed instruction, best practices, and really put it into action. So something that I've started doing, and I did this when I was teaching, I kind of started like the old school way, right? Paper, pencil. I kind of created an IEP tracker of all of my students. When I was in New York City, we had a lot of students in our much larger numbers than in New Jersey. So I was recording 13 students with IEPs, their IEP goals across subject areas. And that's how I would plan, right? I would bring what I knew they were working on, and I would think of strategies that I needed for small group, whole group instruction into my plans. And over time, then when I went into middle school and I had even more classes that I was going between, really thinking about, okay, what's working for these students, maybe in one setting in math that I could share with their ELA teacher or vice versa. Um, and that idea of a tracker, and that's something Ann Benninghoff uses as well, but it's been really helpful in the teachers I've been coaching with this year around specially designed instruction. We have the student names, their IEP goals, and then any SDI notes that we take. So teachers might try, wow, this worked really, really well. I want to remember this for the next lesson, or I want to share this with the gen ed teacher. So whether in science, maybe this is something that could be implemented as well. So I think it's kind of twofold. It's the planning aspect of really what are we targeting in their IEP? What goals are we working on? And then also, how are we sharing this information? right? That was a document that I shared with all my gen ed teachers. We were very much on the same page, but this could be shared with related service providers. It could be shared with the other special ed teachers that are working with the student in other settings. And I think having, a plan for what we're addressing is really important. And one of my teachers that I worked on, this was kind of a year-long project that we worked on. They do kids grades K through 5. So they had a lot of students, a lot of grade levels, a lot of gen ed teachers they worked with. And she's like, this is really making me more effective because I am targeting and zoning into what the students need. And I am providing specially designed instruction, and I can show, right? I can show in my lesson where I am doing this. And it really just started with some organization and kind of taking a step back. Because once you have all your students, you can also see, oh, these 3 kids have a similar goal, right? I can maybe have some targeted instruction for them here. Or these 2 kids have very different goals. How am I going to make sure I'm addressing these goals, in the context of the classroom? But that planning piece is huge, and it's really where I see a lot of teachers getting excited about, like, oh, I can do this, right? It takes some tweaks, but it's not more work. I never want to give more work, right? They're already planning, so now we're just focusing the planning a little more.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Focusing on, the specially designed instruction. Like it's
Exactly,
really,
yeah.
yeah.
And I always show this video because I think we can follow 2 questions, right? So Ann Benninghoff asked 2 questions. What IEP goals did I work on, and what did I do that was special? So I actually have teachers put that on top of their lesson plans, right? Because we could use 2 questions. We can do that.
Hmm.
And if you can't answer those 2 questions, then you're not doing specially designed instruction. Yeah, and so I did a case study in the presentation, and I said, I pretended I was a kindergarten teacher. I did a little, acting, and I said, I gave students, this one student with an IEP a prompt to get started, and I made eye contact and I gave her praise. And I said, is that special, right? It is targeted to her IEP goal if she's working on, school readiness and following directions, but that's not special, right? Any kindergarten teacher would be doing prompts and verbal praise. So we really had to tease out what would make it special versus just good gen ed practices.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the teachers, they were into that, right? It was, sometimes it's kind of on the fence, but they were really being thoughtful in what would count as specially designed instruction.
Hmm. Yeah. I was going to say it provides it does, it makes you think on another level, an extra,
Yeah,
yeah, a higher
exactly.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's
Yeah.
like, okay, like, yeah, like I see what I'm doing there, but it could be a step up, a step
Exactly.
up differently.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. So this next question, it's something that I recently thought about as a way to, hopefully provide, like, start a small resource guide for our listeners, and that is, what book or article, inclusive education related, would you recommend for everyone to read, or can be a movie, a video, or anything.
Hmm. I have so many.
Yeah.
And that's something also that's very special about, I feel like, NJCIE, is that we're always really encouraged to continue learning.
Yes.
And that's something that's really important to me because there's things coming out every day, right? Every day, it's something new. And it's important for us to really stay on top of that. But if I had to pick a few, I might have to give you a few, Arthur. If I had to
Yes,
pick
that's
a
fine.
few, especially design instruction book by Ann Benninghoff. I know I've referenced her a few times. I think it's a really nice practical guide for teachers. I've encouraged a few schools to, maybe think about that for a PLC or a book club study, because it really does talk about specially designed instruction, but then it also goes into that implementation stage. And I think that's huge. And I think that's what's missing a lot of times when teachers understand SDI, but then they're like, okay, but that seems very disconnected to what I'm doing now.
Hmm.
Um, so I would say that book is really excellent. There's also a book that's on my list. I've started it. I haven't finished all of it yet, but it's been really interesting. It's called Equitable and Inclusive IEPs for Students with Complex Support Needs. That's another really great one. I think too, sometimes we get into this work on SDI and I hear from teachers like the IEPs aren't helpful to us, right? They're written in such a deficit way, or they're written in a way that really just lists all like the negative things, right? And that's really not how we should be writing IEPs, but really from a strength-based approach, and really thinking about, like, this is supposed to be a roadmap to us supporting the student, and also highlighting the things that the students are, thriving in and really capable of doing. So I really like that book too, because I think it could change how we're seeing IEPs being written. And that, I think, also can change our mindset about inclusion. for some schools and districts, and also give teachers more support in, okay, if I'm using this IEP to plan, I need to have things that I'm going to be doing. And if it's only deficit based, that's not really helpful as a tool.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So those two books, and then we love our Shelley Moore videos, but there's one of my favorite ones that I always tell schools to listen to, because I think it's so important and really around the mindset of inclusion, is the IEPs, but PEAS, like the food.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and that one, right? And she says, like, nowhere on the seed packet, right? She's talking about gardening. Does it say how the cucumber should become a snap pea, right? And that is, again, like, our students are not broken. We are not fixing them. We are giving them the support they need. And
Yeah.
that is I feel like everybody can take something away from that.
Yes.
Admin, teachers, CST. So that's one of my favorite ones that she does.
Yeah. Thank you. I recently thought about that, and just with all of these episodes, were episode 45, I think, around there. So I'm
Wow.
just thinking, like, there are a lot of resources that all of our guests have read and watched and written themselves, and so
Yeah.
I thought that would be a good question to start sharing some of our knowledge, and like you said, we always like to continue learning, and so it's always great to share what our favorite things are about
Yes.
education, inclusive education.
I think that's a great place for people to come and find resources
Hmm.
and different things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So, my last question for you today is, do you have any advice about inclusion that you can offer to those in school leadership positions, or just for educators in general?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yes. Yes, and this is something I think about a lot in my role. I just enrolled in a doctoral program as well around educational leadership. So this is like the topic of all of our
Yeah.
conversations in class too. So I'm pulling information from grad school and also from, like, being in schools and in districts.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it really comes down to having a strong leader that really sets the tone about, like, what is the culture at our school, right? And again, I think we can tell when the culture is like, we really do include all students and it's something we believe in, versus we're going to just include a few, but it's not something that we put emphasis on or something that we truly believe in. And I think a clear vision helps staff and teachers and families really know the direction. And I think it sets the tone for really all conversations around planning and curriculum and design. And um, so I think really just having a leader with a clear vision is really important. I think working on mindset with staff, especially resistant staff, right? Because we need to really understand where they're coming from and understand their perspective if we're going to really change minds, right? If we're going to really make this a shift. And we know that in New Jersey, we have a lot of work to do around this. So I would say, having a leader that is clear and also provides opportunities for their staff to, talk about their feeling, receive the proper training, be able to ask questions. Um, and really for us to be able to get to the bottom and work collaboratively with them around what is their goal for their school. And we do a lot of, like, writing a vision statement. And I think that's really important, because once it's there on paper, right, it's
Hmm.
something we can use and reflect on. That's kind of how for all of our grant schools, we're looking at creating a vision plan tied to their action plan. And that makes it like, okay, these are the steps we're taking. This is what we believe in as a school. Everyone kind of signs off on it, which is nice. And um, I think, again, when the leader is clear on their vision and their mission for inclusive education, it helps the staff to know the direction that we're going.
Right. Yeah, that's I like how like you said, you started your doctoral program, and that's how it's like a
My
lot of
spare
these
time,
conversations.
right? In my
Yeah.
spare time that we mentioned, yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. But it's been great having this conversation with you, and to share this information about the specially designed instruction, and just to you know uh, get all of this information and to share it with our listeners. It's
Yes.
definitely been a great conversation with you today. So thank you for taking the time to do this, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Arthur. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Yes.
Again, this is one of my favorite topics. So anytime you want to discuss SDI, you know where to find me.
Right. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thanks, Arthur.
Oh, you're welcome. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast. This podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Stay tuned for new episodes of the podcast premiering every 2 weeks. We're all in. Are you?